This is a short video introduction to the Palolo-Pukele Stream Project. I'm also going to do a second one that looks at the quick dirty social history of Palolo. So this particular one's sort of going into just sort of an overview of what the project's about and the different possibilities there are for you as a student to get involved in the project and find something that's, close to something you're interested in or something you find of value. So with that, let's take a look at what we're talking about. Okay. Here you see Palolo Valley. Coming up very slowly for some reason right now. Here's our campus over here, St. Louis Chaminade campus. Wailea Avenue, which pretty much is the bounded definition of Palolo. In fact, even back in the pre-contact period, Palolo seems to have pretty much stopped right around here. Hard to tell why, because there's not particularly any reason. There's no visible features that were there in the area, but whatever. So Palolo extends basically from here back up till it hits the Coalaus back here, with Waimanalo on the other side. Probably the most famous single feature in the valley would be Ka'au Crater here, which is part of a very complex geologic event that occurred back thousands of years ago. So Palolo is this valley here. Pukele was a traditional land name. It's also the name still given to the part of the stream here, because Palolo Stream branches. This becomes Pukele Stream, this becomes Waimau Stream. So the area we're actually interested in is sort of two parts. One is the actual stream boundaries from our campus all the way back to where it branches. The second part, and in some ways sort of the main part of what we're really looking at, is the actual Pukele Stream, which goes back up into here. So the sum total of this is the project, based largely on Palolo-Pukele Stream, but in also looking in a larger context within sort of the idea of what is Palolo. Now, this is pertinent or useful to us at Chaminade St. Louis for the simple reason that in the 1920s, St. Louis, which was a boarding educational school, largely, at least initially, sort of themed for Hawaiian, Portuguese, Chinese students who couldn't get access to the more elite private schools in Hawaii, was set up by a religious order whose name escapes me, but eventually the Marianists took it over, I believe, in the 1880s. It was in Chinatown on River Street, sort of near where Vineyard is. But by the early 20th century, Chinatown had become a very complex, very distracting place, and it wasn't exactly a good place to have a boarding school with a bunch of kids. So the Marianist brothers decided to pull up stakes and move out of downtown, and to find a place that, at least though I haven't seen the actual literature to this, I suspect was a quieter place, a place which would be easier to have students study without a lot of distractions. And so what they did is they purchased this whole area here, Kalaipohaku, this whole chunk of basically from Wailea all the way up to what's now St. Louis Heights. The brothers purchased that and built in the 1920s, built the campus, the St. Louis school campus on the Mackay part. And then by the 1960s, 70s, I'm not sure exactly when, divested themselves of the St. Louis Heights parts, which became, a residential subdivision. So the campus has been here since the 1920s. If you look at early pictures when the campus first showed up, there basically was almost nothing. There were a few scattered homes throughout this whole area of Kaimuki, Palolo, largely Kaimuki side, but it was almost a rural situation. In fact, it was rural enough that the University of Hawaii actually had their first observatory on St. Louis, in Kaimuki on Red Hill. And actually that's now a house, but the building's still there. So the fact that you could actually put an observatory that needed like limited light and high altitude, that they could put that on in Kaimuki, gives you an idea of how unpopulated the area was. So the brothers move in the 1920s. The campus then grows and eventually becomes, in the 1950s, 60s, Chaminade University gets added. And you end up with what we have now in 2020, a combination of grade school, high school, and university within the umbrella of the Marianist order on the slopes of Kalaipōhaku and Palolo. Having said that, like our counterparts over at University of Hawaii, there hasn't been really any detailed investigation by the folks at these institutions about the community they're a part of. University of Hawaii's never done any sort of community survey or study of Manoa. And we've never done any sort of organized comprehensive community study of Palolo. We do a lot of community service learning in Palolo, but we've never actually looked at the community as an entity. And that's what this project is intending to do. We're using the stream as our theme. And this is largely due to the fact that about a year and a half ago, St. Louis School started in the lower part over here, started planting, started developing a wet field system. We're currently in the process of expanding that and eventually putting in a dry field system in this section up here, which is a bulldozed expanse that was, construction site for some of the athletic features that we're putting over here next to the rifle range. So that was actually the original project as of about a year and a half, 2 years ago, was to basically build a fairly comprehensive sort of research station looking at traditional agricultural practices in dryland areas like Palolo, based both on the stream where the wet field loe would be, and also on sort of what you might call just, xerophytic dry vegetation cropping or agricultural systems in this area up here. With that, we realized fairly early on that to a certain extent, if you were going to look at what we wanted to do down here, you really needed a better idea of what was going on along the stream. And that's actually where this project is a much expanded project, but it intends to basically look both at the community, but more specifically the area that's bounded by the stream and impacted and affected by the stream. Because the stream was central for the last 600-800 years. The stream has been absolutely central to human existence in Palolo. It was responsible for feeding people, it was responsible for providing people with water. It was as central to the Aina for this particular region. And the fact that it hasn't been studied is now why we're doing it. So if we go ahead to this, okay. Oops, sorry. Okay, now you guys can see it. Okay, here's the summary. I mean, from a totally cynical standpoint, there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense for the campuses to do this. It'll allow us to provide you, the student, with an experience which combines what you learn in a classroom in the traditional sense and actually field application, how you actually use it for something, which is, what your careers are going to look like in the future. It allows us as faculty to engage in research that we'd like to do that, really isn't part of the normal sort of tradition of, quote, teaching a class, unquote. It allows us to do that with you. So we're engaging in research with you as co-researchers rather than like telling you in a PowerPoint, how to do something. It gives the Palolo community a chance for us to be engaged with them, to them provide feedback to us, and for us to work as part of a larger unit with a common set of shared goals and interest in Palolo in general. So we're breaking this up in sort of two major parts. And this is, I'm a geographer, and what geographers do is, among other things, what we call regional studies. And this is a regional study of basically the ili of Palolo. And so this involves two parts. One part is going to be easy to do even with the COVID outbreak that's going on. And that's basically what you might call classic research, what we oftentimes call archival work, digging through, various types of print resources and trying to sort of find as much as we can out about the area and organize the material that's out there. The second part is actually the field survey. We're going to be on foot going up Pukele Stream with the purpose of both sampling various types of organisms, plant and animals we see. I'm looking for changes in the landscape, and also just sort of to give a sense of just what is Pukele Stream, which again, no one particularly has really sort of looked at in any detail. So as you go through this PowerPoint, you'll see there's a bunch of different archival themes. One is we need to develop a detailed geologic history of Palolo. There's a number of geologic works on Oahu, but it's always usually within the context of the island. So looking at Palolo as a sort of a separate thing is not something that's accessible, and we need to sort of dig that out. We need to ferret together basically a social history of Palolo, in both large, probably the newspaper records, both in English and also in Hawaiian, especially within the paper project. And that's basically anything that's come up since the 1830s that somehow mentions or something that happens in Palolo. So again, this, the stuff's in print, finding it's going to be our job. The third is developing what's oftentimes in geography called a toponomic, which just means, if you want to think of this as place names and the meanings behind them. Now you have to remember, traditionally, place names were tied to stories, especially throughout all of the Pacific, especially here in Hawaii. A place name was given to a place because that place related to something or was a manifestation of something. And some of the larger place names, we have some sort of vague general descriptions of those. We need to get more down into the more specifics of what those stories were. Why did those place names end up there? Where was the actual place they were talking about? And again, we don't really know that. Even that concept of Palolo is sort of vague. Why does Palolo turn into Pukele? Where does Wild Mouse start? Part of Palolo in the late 19th century was actually called Kapahulu. And yet there was also Kapahulu down Makai. So, what's that all about? So all of that's part of this toponomic discussion. What I also think we ought to look at, because I don't know if anyone's looked at this, is the contemporary road naming. There's a lot of sort of interesting bureaucratic stuff that goes with getting place names here in Hawaii to put onto roads. But I don't know that that's ever been looked at in a historic context. And there's some interesting road names here in Palolo, like for example, New Jersey Avenue. I mean, what's that about? So digging all that stuff up, which is probably available, I can guarantee anywhere, is probably in the newspapers. But again, no one's ever looked at it. And I think it gives, in some ways, it's actually a reflection of who we are here in this valley. And also, of course, land ownership. And when I get into the social history thing I'll mention, there were about 30 plus land claim awards given for parts of Palolo in the Mahele during the 1840s and 1850s. What I think we really got to look at is both what were those claims, or were the descriptions of what was on the property in those claims, and what happened to those claims. Where did those people go? What happened to those people? How did those land claims, which included a pretty good chunk of the valley, turn into subdivisions? What was the process by which that happened? There's been a fair amount of research done in Hawaii about the impacts of the Mahele and how, Hawaiians, for example, lost land in the Mahele. Real good work in Kahana on that. But I haven't seen anything that's really sort of a longitudinal discussion that brings you down to the present. And especially just sort of looks at like what happened to the players at that point in time. How did the subdivisions here develop, like Carlos Law? So that's another archival theme. And also, some of my background and training is actually looking at the actual inventory of house types. What type of residences are there in Palolo? How do these manifest or reflect various, ethnic backgrounds? How do the built environments, in other words, how homes are built, how the homes are designed, how the things that are on the homes reflect both local values, larger American value systems, or maybe the other ethnic groups. This has been done in other places, but again, there's been no particular study done that, as far as I know of, here in Hawaii. So we're first up to bat with that. Given the fact that we're interested in agriculture, that was the original project here on campus. Excuse me. One of the things we want to look at is past and contemporary agricultural practices here in Palolo. Might not be aware, but the back of the valley actually has a number of farmers still growing crops commercially. We want to take a really close look at that. One of the things we really want to do is actually talk to those people. This is what we're going to be doing as part of the archives, but further down the road, we actually want to go and try to get as much knowledge as we can from these folks who are still doing, they're still working the land here in Palolo and in the 2020s, and get a sense both of where they come from, their history here, what they see the valley as now, and what they see the agricultural potentials for the valley in the future. So this starts in the archival and then segues into the field survey. Last, given our particular background, because we're a Catholic institution, and it seems like it'd be interesting to take a look at, because again, I've never seen anything like this, would be looking at the past and contemporary religious practices in Palolo-Pukele. You know, what type of religious institutions were in the valley, which ones are still here, which ones started up. For example, Hong Wonji in the middle of the valley originally was downtown, I think, and then it moved, I just saw an account, it moved to somewhere along Waialae Avenue, I think down where old Waialae is, but it got shunted out of there when they put the freeway in, so it ended up in Palolo in the 1950s or 60s or whenever the freeway went in. So, you know, on one hand, that's very much part of a Japanese ethos. So I suspect it was probably near Mo'ili'ili originally, but it's now here in Palolo. So, you know, and eventually, again, this would also involve talking with them. What is the history of that place? What other type of religious institutions do we have here? Both formal ones, in the sense of churches per se, and also informal ones. What type of religious things do people do that we see in the cultural landscape here in Palolo that make this place what it is? And the last part, which is again, not really so much archival, but we're going to be getting into, would be basically the current perception and views of Palolo. Palolo is a very, very complex place, much more so, I would argue, than say Manoa or Kaimuki. And that leads to, I think, some very complex and very, very different views of what makes Palolo, depending on who you are, where you are, etc. We really want to try to dig into that and see what we can find. So that's going to be sort of the last of these, you know, sort of starting archival, but then going into other aspects. The second major theme is the field study. This is what I mentioned. This is actually the foot study. We might end up walking up Palolo Stream. I don't know if we're going to do that in terms of the actual field teams. I know that CUH's already done it, so I'm not sure that we have to. But at least a couple of us will probably go up there so we at least get some sort of a record. This is the area the Corps of Engineers has modified in the 20th century. And again, I have to go back, and that's another part of the archival thing, is trying to dig back and figure out just exactly who did what to this valley in the past. Because of course, this is part of this huge discussion going on now with the Alloway watershed and the Corps of Engineers project that's gotten so much controversy. But what we really want to look at is where Pukele Stream branches from Waimau, which is pretty much at the public housing project at the park. We want to look at both the botanical, in other words, the plant communities that exist along the stream, both indigenous, whatever there's left of that, Polynesian introduced, and also exotics, you know, without making critical judgments, but what's exactly going on biologically in the area around the stream. Secondly, of course, would actually be the biological, zoological inventory of what's going on in the stream. I have no idea what we're going to find. I don't know that anyone's ever looked at that stuff, except maybe in virtue of, you know, sort of localized EISs or something. Water quality, obviously. Some of this is already available. We probably have to increase some of that, or maybe do, you know, time samples. And last, of course, is my specialty. That would be basically doing a cultural landscape study of the area of Pukele going Malka, which is basically looking at all the changes that people have made to the land from the start of our study area back up as far as we can get in the valley. All of the field study project is going to be later. I'm figuring probably October, you know, depending on, it's hard to tell what's going on with this whole COVID thing. But this would involve teams of Chaminade St. Louis students under faculty. Going up with each team with a specific, you know, project or part of the project that they've got in hand that they're working together. And hopefully these teams will be around for at least a year. So we want the teams to be folks that are willing to commit to, you know, an extended period of time, and also just to help the Chaminade St. Louis students like yourselves to get to know both each other better and also understand the process of learning that we're all going through as we're trying to do a new piece of research in a new place. So the field study is going to be much longer in some ways. And then, like all field studies, having done these for, you know, a billion years, it seems like, they go on as long as they take. So, you know, any of you guys are involved in a field study now, I can guarantee will not be around when we're done unless you're, you know, 150 years old or something. But this will be the field study. So these are the two themes, one of the archival areas or the field study. For Chaminade students who are basically working on a semester basis, this semester I would strongly encourage go with the archival. We cannot be sure if the field studies are going to start, when it's going to start. So if you're hinging your service learning on the field study, that's an incredibly optimistic, and I would suggest a very bad idea, because my cynical view of the way things work is whatever you plan isn't going to happen. If you check my door, you'll see Murphy's Laws on it. And I've been a field archaeologist for 1,000,000 years, and field studies never start when they're supposed to, and they never work out the way you think they're going to. So for the fall semester for Chaminade folks, let's figure doing some aspect of the archival. Take a look at it, think it over, look at the stuff, try to think what might be even vaguely interesting or useful to you, and then make that the focus that you want to take a look at, and then let me know, and then we'll set up folks in terms of specific goals and tasks to actually take on. So that's the study we're looking at, and that's where we plan to go this semester, and at least probably for this academic year, and probably for the next couple of years, and pretty much one way or the other.